Saturday Night Live for most of the 1990s was truly something special, with casts that included the likes of Dana Carvey, Mike Myers, Tracy Morgan, Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, and more. The show seemed to be nothing short of consistent comedy gold week in and week out. In the background of all these huge stars that graced the show's stage, though, was a mild-mannered native of Ontario, Canada, with an instantly recognizable voice and a never-ending well of comedic talent. A man who earned the nickname The Glue for how consistently he held the show together throughout turbulent cast shakeups and ratings scares. That man was Phil Hartman. Phil was born in 1948, the middle of 8 children, to his mother Doris and his father Rupert. When Phil was 10 years old, his family moved to the United States, settling down in Lewiston, Maine. They didn't stay there long and soon moved to Meriden, Connecticut, and eventually to Los Angeles, California. In high school, Mr. Hartman developed a reputation for being a class clown, something that would prove oddly prophetic for the career he would have later in life. After graduating, he briefly studied art at Santa Monica College, but ended up dropping out in 1969 so he could work as a roadie for a rock band. It was a good job for Mr. Hartman, as he was something of a music enthusiast who enjoyed playing the guitar. The arrangement worked well for the band, too, as they took advantage of Phil's artistic background and recruited him to design their logo and album covers. In 1970, he married a woman named Gretchen Lewis, but the marriage did not last long, and the couple would divorce just 2 years later. This was the beginning of an unfortunate trend of tough luck in Phil's love life, one that would have a tragic and deadly end a couple of decades later. Eventually, Mr. Hartman decided he enjoyed doing design work so much that he went back to school for it, enrolling in California State University. Phil went on to graduate and made a decent living for himself as a graphic designer, creating over 40 album covers for various bands, including Poco and America. He even designed the band logo for Crosby, Stills and Nash, but for whatever reason was never given credit for doing so by the band. Surprisingly, Mr. Hartman wasn't bitter about this, and even confessed in an interview years later that he found it funny. As much as Phil enjoyed the graphic design work, he also found it very lonely, often spending hours by himself in his office. In order to help pass the time, he would create different characters in his head and start talking in their voice while he worked. On the surface, this may come off to some people as a guy losing his mind, but this would end up being a valuable component of his success later in life. In 1975, Phil decided that he needed a creative outlet and joined an improv comedy class ran by the Los Angeles-based comedy troupe The Groundlings. The group was formed in 1974 by Gary Austin, and throughout the years has springboarded the careers of some of the biggest names in comedy, including Kristen Wiig, Will Ferrell, and Lisa Kudrow, just to name a few. At the time Mr. Hartman met the group, though, they were still up and coming, but his chemistry with the troupe was almost immediate. Phil began performing with them regularly, but was still considered a student for a short time. During this period, he would pay for his lessons by putting his graphic design skills to use and creating merchandise for the group. Soon after, he was brought on as a full-time cast member, and was considered one of the leading members by the end of the 1970s. During this time, 2 people would join the Groundlings who'd end up making a huge impact on Phil's life and career: John Lovitz and Paul Rubens. The 3 quickly became good friends and frequent collaborators on stage. Together, Hartman and Rubens worked on a character for the latter to play in stage shows named Pee Wee Herman, a character who would end up taking both of the comedians' careers to the next level. Despite prospects looking bright in his professional life, Phil continued to struggle in his love life. He made what was technically his first television appearance in the late 1970s on The Dating Game, where he won but was ultimately stood up by the young woman for their date. The 1980s began with Mr. Hartman going full steam ahead into his comedy career. The Pee Wee Herman stage shows had become very successful and was providing Phil with a steady stream of income. An HBO special was filmed in 1981, with Hartman playing his signature role of Captain Carl. Around this time, he also began getting small roles in film and television, most notably in Cheech and Chong's next movie and The Smurfs. In 1982, he married his second wife, real estate agent Lisa Strain. The two were very much in love, with Phil describing her as his soulmate. But unfortunately, the marriage did not last, and the two divorced in 1985. Miss Strain chalked the marriage's failures up to Phil's reclusive nature and infidelity, saying that offstage and off-screen, Mr. Hartman would retreat into his own world and would emotionally disappear. Though she would say in interviews years later that Phil always held a special place in her heart. By the mid-1980s, Mr. Hartman was becoming frustrated with what he saw as limited career opportunities, and watching many of his friends' careers surpass his own. Rubens was gaining nationwide recognition for his role as Pee Wee Herman, and Jon Lovitz was hired by Saturday Night Live producer Lorne Michaels as part of a revamped cast who he hoped would save the show after a disastrous 10th season almost saw the storied series canceled. To add salt to the wound, when Michaels showed up to watch the Groundlings perform, everyone in the cast, including Lovitz, assumed he was there to offer Hartman a job, and were quite taken aback when he revealed that he had no interest in Phil and was there for Jon instead. Hartman wasn't necessarily jealous of his friend's success, but at the age of 36, he was starting to doubt if he could break through to the next level of his career, and briefly considered retiring from comedy and going back to graphic design. It was around this time that Warner Brothers Studios got into contact with Paul Rubens and offered to produce a feature film starring his Pee Wee Herman character. After coming up with a first draft of the film's script, Mr. Rubens needed a director and ended up settling on a, at the time, completely unknown director by the name of Tim Burton. With funding for the film and its director now secured, Paul asked Mr. Hartman to join him in revising the film's script and polishing it to a final draft. Together they finished it and settled on the title Pee Wee's Big Adventure, with the film releasing in August of 1985. It was an immediate hit, making the entirety of its production budget back in the first week of theatrical release. Tim Burton would go on to become one of the most in-demand directors in Hollywood, and would close out the decade with a string of monumental successes. Rubens gained worldwide recognition, with Pee Wee Herman becoming one of the most beloved figures in pop culture. And Hartman saw his fading passion for comedy reignited after the film's success. Later that year, Rubens was scheduled to host Saturday Night Live, which was struggling to find its rhythm with the new cast and was once again teetering on the verge of cancellation. Paul agreed, but only under the stipulation that he could bring his writers along with him to work on the sketches for the episode. This was very uncommon as far as SNL goes, with Lorne Michaels notoriously against creative input outside of his team of writers. For whatever reason though, perhaps desperation at the show's low ratings, he agreed, and Phil along with the rest of the Pee Wee Herman team was brought on board to write the episode. When Mr. Hartman came to work with the SNL writers, Lorne Michaels immediately took note of how seamlessly Phil transitioned into the group. The producer was immensely impressed with how easy Phil was to work with and how funny the ideas he came up with were. At one point, Michaels expressed his admiration for Hartman to Paul Rubens' manager, who responded by saying, "You haven't seen anything yet." If Michaels had any doubt about Phil Hartman's ability before this, all of that doubt had now been thoroughly erased. On November 23, 1985, Pee Wee Herman hosted Saturday Night Live, and despite the 11th season generally not being well regarded, Rubin's appearance is considered one of the high points, thanks in no small part to Phil's work behind the scenes. Riding high off the character's success, at the end of 1985, Rubens immediately began to work on ideas for a sequel film as well as a television series. Unfortunately, creative differences began forming between him and Hartman around this time. Phil believed that Paul was an immensely talented comedian who possessed a Charlie Chaplin-esque ability to play a variety of different characters. He believed that with the recent success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Rubens would be better off trying to expand to different roles, and that if he continued to only play the same character, he would quickly become typecast and squander his incredible talents. Paul very much disagreed with this, and took more of a if it ain't broke, don't fix it approach. The fans wanted more Pee Wee Herman, and Rubens was going to give it to them. If losing out on work because no one could picture him playing anything else became an issue, that was a bridge he'd cross when he came to it. Sadly, these creative differences became so substantial it affected their friendship, resulting in a falling out that saw Phil leave the show by the end of 1986. Tragically, the two would not speak again for the remainder of Phil's life. Now out on his own, Mr. Hartman continued to do voiceover work and make small appearances in films, most notably the Whoopi Goldberg-led comedy Jumpin' Jack Flash and the John Landis-directed Three Amigos. Above all else, Phil wanted to write comedy films, and had the confidence to do so now after the success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. He decided to audition for the 12th season of Saturday Night Live, hoping that if he could become a cast member and writer, it would lend him some credibility for the box office. However, things were not going well for the long-running comedy series at this time. Lorne Michaels had been brought back and tasked with restoring the show to its glory days after a universally panned 10th season, with the 11th season of the series described as make or break. Unfortunately, this was a task he had failed at. Despite some high points and the popularity of a few new cast members such as Phil's groundling co-star Jon Lovitz, the 11th season of Saturday Night Live had been a critical and ratings disaster. NBC executives were now convinced the show was beyond saving, and the order to pull the plug was given. In response, Michaels went to the producers himself and pleaded with them for one more season, to which they eventually agreed and reversed their decision. Determined to make the most of this final chance, Michaels cleaned house and let go of almost everyone from the prior season's cast, except for Jon Lovitz, Dennis Miller, Nora Dunn, and Alan Whitney Brown. In his search for a new cast, he honed in on actors who had a history of doing improv, as opposed to going for the biggest names like he had for season 11. Hartman fit this mold perfectly, and absolutely nailed his audition for the show, even working in a couple of bits with his friend Jon Lovitz. Lorne Michaels was ecstatic and remarked that he may have found the next Dan Aykroyd due to Phil's impeccable blend of acting and writing talent. Phil was hired onto the cast along with Dana Carvey, Kevin Nealon, Jan Hooks, and Victoria Jackson for season 12, with Michaels placing the fate of the show on the shoulders of its new cast. And did they ever deliver? The new team seemed to hit the ground running almost immediately, and injected a much-needed dose of life into the fading comedy juggernaut. Phil quickly gained notoriety for his hilarious characters and impersonations, and would go on to be one of the series' main players for the next 8 seasons. Over his years on the show, he would become particularly known for his impressions of people like Ronald Reagan, Ed McMahon, Phil Donahue, Frank Sinatra, and most famous of all, Bill Clinton. In exchange for being part of the group that saved the program, Saturday Night Live gave Mr. Hartman the career break he'd been searching almost a decade for. Things seemed to be looking up in Phil's love life as well. In 1986, a friend set him up on a blind date with a former swimsuit model and aspiring actress named Bryn Omdahl. The two fell for each other instantly, and were married a year later, with Bryn giving birth to their son Sean in 1989 and their daughter Bergen in 1992. Hartman adored his children, and often spoke to his SNL co-stars about what a joy it was to finally be a father. To friends and family, the Hartmans seemed like the perfect couple with a perfect family. But shortly into the marriage, Bryn began exhibiting some disturbing behavior. For starters, she was extremely possessive of Phil, and became very jealous whenever other women would speak to or associate with him. Now, at first this might seem somewhat understandable. Mr. Hartman admitted that he had a bit of a wandering eye, and had ruined relationships in the past with his infidelity. However, this quickly went beyond your standard jealous wife and became something much more psychotic. When Phil's son Sean was born, his ex-wife Lisa sent the couple a simple card congratulating them on the child's birth. In response to this very benign gesture, Bryn sent Lisa a multiple-page-long response riddled with graphic death threats and several warnings to never contact Phil again. This type of behavior wasn't limited to former romantic partners either, as Bryn had also drafted similar threatening letters with the intention of sending them to some of Phil's Saturday Night Live castmates, whom she felt were getting too close with her husband. This included Jan Hooks, who played Hillary Clinton alongside Hartman's Bill on the show, and frequently collaborated with him on other sketches. It is worth noting that the letters intended for Phil's co-stars were never sent, but a troubling pattern was beginning to emerge with Mrs. Hartman's behavior. Bryn was known to be depressed and have extreme anger issues, which she tried to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol, particularly cocaine. This obviously didn't help, and would often cause terrible fights between her and Phil, resulting in him even removing the children from the home in some cases. Most of these issues went unknown to anyone outside of their closest friends, with a majority of their friends believing that Bryn and Phil had an ideal marriage. Unfortunately, the problems boiling beneath the surface would be brought to light all too soon. Phil continued to experience success in his comedy career throughout the late 80s and early 90s, culminating in an Emmy Award for his work on SNL in 1989. He became a staple on late-night talk shows and did frequent voiceover work on various other programs, most notably on The Simpsons, where Phil appeared in over 50 episodes playing various characters, including Troy McClure, a washed-up celebrity with a hilariously long filmography. He also managed to land small roles in several films, such as So I Married an Axe Murderer and The Coneheads. As Mr. Hartman's career soared to new heights, however, his wife struggled to get hers going at all. Bryn desperately wanted a career in film and television. She took acting lessons and was even rumored to have gotten cosmetic surgery to improve her physical appearance, but things just couldn't fall into place for her. Phil gave it his best effort with trying to find her work, but that didn't yield many results outside of small gigs as a background extra. This caused her depression and anger to worsen, and eventually manifested itself as resentment toward her husband for the success he was enjoying. Behind closed doors, the Hartmans' marriage suffered severe strain as a result of this. But despite these issues, neither Phil nor Bryn wanted a divorce, and continued to try and make things work between them. In 1994, Phil decided to leave Saturday Night Live after his 8th season. He felt that he'd gone as far as he could with the program, and had been offered the lead role in a new sitcom coming out that fall called News Radio. Phil was attracted to the show due to its talented cast, which included Dave Foley, Stephen Root, Maura Tierney, and a young Joe Rogan. Phil was cast as arrogant news anchor Bill McNeil, a role that fit him like a glove. This also allowed him and his wife to leave New York and move back to Los Angeles. The move also gave Bryn a renewed sense of hope at her career prospects, and Phil was happy to no longer be juggling the cross-country trips that were often required of him while he was a cast member on SNL. Bryn also elected to check herself into rehab around this time, realizing that her drug and alcohol addictions were wearing on her family, and had sought help for her depression from a psychiatrist who'd provided her with the medication Zoloft as a treatment. In the final months of 1997, though, all of that would change. Bryn suffered a relapse around the end of that year. Some have pointed to Phil's News Radio co-star Andy Dick as the culprit in this, alleging that he gave Miss Hartman some cocaine at a Christmas party for the show's cast, which triggered her relapse, though others have disputed this claim. Regardless, Bryn spiraled out of control worse than she ever had before, leading to an extremely tumultuous period at the beginning of 1998, where she and Phil were constantly fighting and on the verge of separation. On the night of May 27th, Bryn went out to dinner with her friend Christine Zander, who was a supervising producer on Third Rock from the Sun, which Bryn had appeared on as an extra a few months earlier. According to Zander, Mrs. Hartman was in a good frame of mind and didn't mention any problems. The two enjoyed their meal and made plans to see each other again soon. After dinner, Bryn went over to the house of her friend Ron Douglas, where, according to his statement to police, she had a couple of beers and complained about Phil before leaving right before 1 a.m. She returned home where at some point a fight broke out between her and her husband. Phil's lawyer and friend, Steve Small, believes that the argument was due to Bryn's drug and alcohol abuse, and theorized that Mr. Hartman likely gave his wife an ultimatum: go back to rehab or the marriage is over. At some point during the fight, Phil responded how he had so often done in the past. He withdrew and headed to bed. Bryn, wide awake and boiling with rage, continued to drink and sniff cocaine until something inside her just snapped. She walked over to a gun safe in the couple's home and retrieved a .38 caliber pistol from inside before walking into the bedroom and firing 3 shots into her sleeping husband. One struck Phil in the chest, a second in the neck, and a third in his head. He died instantly at the age of 49. The couple's children were asleep in their bedrooms upstairs, and their son Sam later told police that he mistook the sound of gunfire for a door slamming. She immediately left the crime scene and returned to her friend Ron's house, where she began pounding on his door to wake him at almost 4 a.m. He recalls getting out of bed and answering to see Bryn with a zombified look on her face, saying, "I killed Phil, I don't know why." Mr. Douglas did not believe what she was saying, and drove back with her to the home. Upon arriving, he went into the couple's bedroom where he made the horrific discovery of Phil lying there dead. Realizing now that Bryn was indeed very serious, he returned to the hallway to call 911, where he soon discovered that Mrs. Hartman had run into the master bedroom and locked herself inside. Just before 6 a.m., police arrived on scene and immediately went upstairs to remove both of the children from the home. They made repeated attempts to talk Bryn out of the bedroom, none of which were successful. And a short time after they had gotten both children out of the house, a shot rang out from behind the bedroom door. Police busted the door down and rushed inside to find Mrs. Hartman lying on the floor next to her husband. Unable to live with the guilt of what she had done, she took her own life. As news broke of Phil's death, shock and heartbreak rang out across the entertainment world. The murder hit Phil's Saturday Night Live co-stars particularly hard, with John Lovitz, who would end up taking over for Phil on news radio, confessing he was depressed for several years after Hartman's death. Tributes poured in over the next several months, from late-night television to SNL. Simpsons creator Matt Groening dedicated the episode Bart the Mother to his fallen friend, which featured Hartman's final performance on the show. The Hartmans' remains were cremated and their ashes scattered across the Santa Catalina Islands, a favorite vacation destination for the couple. Sean and Bergen were sent to live with Mr. Hartman's brother, but were later transferred into the custody of Bryn's sister in accordance with their last will and testament. They were raised under different last names to avoid any media spotlight, but Bergen did attend a memorial to her father which aired on Saturday Night Live in 2015, thanking the show's producer Lorne Michaels on social media for all the work he has done in keeping her father's memory alive. Though the children both seem to have learned to live with the tragedy, some of the Hartmans' friends and family have not. Bryn's brother Greg filed a lawsuit against Pfizer, the manufacturer of Zoloft, alleging that it had altered his sister's behavior and had caused her to lose control and kill Phil along with herself. The lawsuit was dismissed, but Greg still maintains his belief that it played a part in Bryn's actions, and to this day he is a strong advocate for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. Phil Hartman may be gone, but the legacy he left behind will live on forever, in the countless hours of laughter he provided to his fans, in the lives of his co-stars and friends that he made such a tremendous impact on, and in the lives of his children, who he loved more than anything else in the world. If you are interested in true crime, criminal justice history, or mysterious stories from around the world, consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell so you can be updated whenever we post something new. As we close in on 5,000 subscribers, I once again want to thank everyone who has supported this channel. You're an amazing audience, and we appreciate all of you immensely. This is Crime Spot, and thank you for watching.